Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Laurin Conlon, and today I'm joined by Rick, our mental health consultant, to cover technology burnout. And this is something that, if y'all know me, you know this is what I deal with all the time. Actually, as we're recording this, I'm on the second week of my social media break, which is fantastic, which we can touch on a little bit here. But I did get a question specifically about tech burnout, and I wanted to read the question just because I think that it resonates with so many people. And I think a lot of the listeners will be like, oh my gosh, yes, I experienced this, which is going to go really nicely with the podcast. So I'm an online coach, so a lot of my communication with clients is via app messaging, Zoom calls, and voice messages. I find that I have withdrawn a lot without really intending to from being as responsive to my friends and family via messaging and phone calls because I feel like it's a constant in my life and find it very draining. When I'm not working, I want to be as far away from my phone and laptop. How do I keep my job, stay connected socially, and not burn out from overuse of technology? Now, I do want to preface this and say that the person opened with, I am an online coach. But to be honest, I feel like anybody who really works in a mainly online capacity, not just somebody who's a coach, would be experiencing this, especially a lot of my clients who, are working now from home. A lot of people have transitioned to that. So this gets really blurry. Obviously, as an online coach, there's a different level to this if you're putting out content. So there's going to be the work and the content. So if somebody is dealing with both of those things, that can be particularly draining. However, even if you're not an online coach, this is not just about that. This is just about technology burnout in general. So I don't want anybody to turn that off, but I do find that this has gotten significantly worse over the past 2 years with my clients. I don't know if you've seen that trend with yours as well, but it is staggeringly different.
Well, business practices in general have shifted and changed, right? And you can blame the pandemic for that. Everybody who used to work in an office, now possesses the ability to almost work remotely 100% of the time. And so what we're seeing and what we're experiencing now in today's workforce and society is more and more people, regardless of what your profession is, if you're an online coach or even if you're in sales or project management, people are doing multiple Zoom calls a day. They're sitting in front of their computers, their laptops. So technology burnout in general is a very real problem for a lot of people. And then when you factor in, like for most online coaches, they're not going into an office and then going home. They're pretty much working from home, most people.
Well, and when you're working in a service-based business, especially if you're working for, yourself or even a small company, it does get very blurry if you don't set any boundaries.
Correct.
Which we're going to touch on. But it is so important because even if you are working from home, with a traditional job, a lot of times they will have a clock in, clock out time. They will still honor that. Now, doesn't mean that you can't work on a project later or something like that. Of course, I understand that. But when there are no hours, right? Like there's, you could work 0 hours one day or 15 the next, like it's just going to depend. And sometimes that people do that for certain reasons. But as a general rule, we want to maybe set some boundaries, which we'll touch on.
Yeah. And so this is a very real problem in an aspect of today's society that we just wanted to address. And so one of the first ways I think to start this off is that in the past, traditional work/life boundaries used to be rooted in society's expectations, and they were defined pretty clearly. We knew when we left the office, we had these real strict rules. Everybody kind of knew the times, the hours, what was expected of them. As we've progressed as a society, those boundaries have changed dramatically. In today's society, it went from some gradual changes and in some cases like pretty immediate changes, and they moved completely away from clearly defined boundaries and roles. And now there's a lot more incomplete or distorted aspect of what is expected today of today's employees and what's expected of individuals in service industries. I think like social media in general and the immediacy of information and getting things like instantaneously has kind of created this society where we expect information instantly. Like if I send an email to my coach, I want and expect a response, right? And if I don't get that response, what does that mean? And how long is an appropriate amount of time to wait? And so the anxiety in the client starts to build, and then it starts to build within us that we're not being as responsive as we should be. And so it's this twofold. And I want to get ahead, so I'm going to work longer hours, or my job requires me to do these things. And so Now that I'm working from home, there's an expectation that I can carry more of a load because I don't have to commute. And so there's 2 or 3 extra hours of my day that I might get back. And so it gets to be this like, where does work start and where does it stop and where does my life begin? And when do I put it on pause to do my job? And so the boundaries around it are very confusing. And so it's really easy to get lost. And I think the person who wrote this question is just kind of teetering on that space. Like, what's the balance? And when is it okay for me to back away? And is this normal? We'll cover all that as we kind of dive in here.
And I think one of the things that she mentioned here, which is so pervasive, is being on this constantly for something work related, but then wanting to withdraw. But then because you're withdrawing from those people in your life, then you feel like you're not connected to them, right? And then it's like this very strange thing where you're like, I love this thing, but I resent it at the same time. And how do I balance that? That is really, I think, where a lot of this struggle comes from, is wanting to be connected with people in your life. And, a lot of us obviously have people who are all over the world. So social media can connect everybody, which is amazing. Zoom can connect people, all these different kinds of things. However, like there's a level to it to where it's like, all right, this is too much. Right. And the biggest problem is that, no matter who you are, no matter how strong-willed you are, I don't care. These things suck you in. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Like, we just get so used to like our attention going to things like that. And we start to crave that type of almost immediate and like satisfying either visual or audio or clip or something entertaining or whatever. And you get so used to seeing that kind of stuff. And it does fill this weird void. And this is what I noticed last year when I took a break from social media, which was like my very first like planned, I called it my sabbatical to be super dramatic as on brand. Of course I've taken, days off or whatever, but not like deleted the app off my phone, zero, not even just creating content, but engaging and consuming it. And I noticed a lot of the just tendencies at first, the first few days, especially just the grabbing and the very compulsive. I used to think of it more as an addiction. And now I've changed my way of thinking about it as more of a compulsion, because a lot of times I would seek it out of really no need other than I would just do this normally, or let me just look at this. And even I have Instagram on like 3 pages back, you know what I mean? On my, and I would literally open the phone for no reason, scroll there and then be like, what am I doing? I just blacked out for half of a second, you know what I mean? And here I am, and now I can't click on it. But if this had been open, I would have clicked on it, right? And that, I'm not the only person who's experienced this. When I shared this, it sounds literally insane, but everybody's like, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Maybe you don't if you haven't taken time to look at those patterns, but start to recognize how you start to consume things. And I've literally found that in this period, and I noticed this last time as well, there is this like sometimes desire to like see that type of content or engage in that type of way. And it's like this agitation of like, I want to see this. And then you're like, oh my God, like what monster is living inside of me that like wants to see this? Because really like there are certain things I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this person's stuff, or like want to see what my friends are doing, or, this page is funny or whatever it might be. So there are some genuine things that are like enjoyable, but for the most part, like you can see that for 10, 15 minutes and then move on, but that's not how it goes.
Nope.
Like you just open it. And there are so many times in these past 2 weeks where I've sat down or been somewhere that I've gone to open that, and that would be a normal time that I would maybe consume something, and it's completely an irrelevant time. It is not a necessary time to do that. And there are so many other things that I need to be doing. And it's not even that I really want to see it. It's like this just weird compulsion. So it is very interesting. And even if you are this mentally strong-willed person, like if it's there, you're probably going to click on it. You know what I mean? So it is about, you have to set boundaries and figure out that for yourself as well, which is very challenging. Yeah,
most people aren't the outlier here. Most of us are falling on the bell-shaped curve here, and we're going to talk about our consumption of technology, and we're not going to be able to just click one page, look at one thing, and then put the phone down. You're going to go down and click through stories and reels.
And everybody has different things that they like. Like some people are like, I don't really care about Instagram, I like TikTok, or like, no, the YouTube comment section is where it's at. Or like, oh, I fell down a Reddit thread. And I'm like, I never even looked on Reddit. So some people, but everybody gravitates towards different things, and you have to kind of know that for yourself.
One thing that I did want to talk about in this particular question was she. We're going to go with she, right?
She. Yes.
Okay.
Actually was.
All right. Perfect. Because I was just not even going to have that argument today. This person was going to be a she regardless. So she mentioned that I think she talked about it being a tireless thing between responding to her clients all day and then still wanting to interact and engage with her family later. And it's exhausting. And so when your job is to talk to and engage with people on a daily basis, it is exhausting to come home and to continue to talk to people in your family. But this is an important aspect to really start to understand and why the boundaries are so important. If you listened to the dating podcast that we did recently, one of the topics that we talked about was one of the biggest issues in dating is that the person that you're dating ends up getting the leftovers, right? You spend all your time, energy, and effort into building all these other things in work, in business, and your social life and all this other stuff. And so what gets left over is our family members and our loved ones are the ones that just get the leftover part of us. And this happens a lot within this dynamic is you're so engaged with your clients. And I'm a therapist, right? That's my job, is to talk to people day in and day out. So I truly empathize with this question, because it's like, one of the boundaries that I have is for people to recognize and know around me, like, look, I'm not withdrawing from you. I just need a break from talking. Mm-hmm. I need a break from listening and engaging in somebody else's story. And I need to take a break. And this is a very real part of my self-care model. It doesn't mean, though, that I get to completely avoid that responsibility or obligation because I'm a therapist or because I'm a coach. It doesn't mean you only get the leftovers. And so I want to work to incorporate better boundaries in my work experience so that the people around me aren't just getting leftovers. And so that's really important. So let's get into some practical steps, because I felt like this is one where we don't have to spend too much time like diving around the topic of what is it, defining it. We can just kind of get into what are some helpful steps. So the first step I want to talk about is, what are your expectations that you've set with your employer or your clients? And this is a big one. That's why I started off with it. If you have not had conversations with your clients or your employer about what the expectation is for the hours to contact you and when replying and being responsive is necessary and required versus when this is my off time, this is where we really want to start. Because first or foremost, one of the questions that I would have to follow that up is there a need or a requirement for an immediate or instantaneous response to this question? Okay. Can it wait till the next day? And the answer 99 out of 100 times is yes. Let's be honest. We're not curing cancer. Okay. No one's life is hanging in the balance of, can I eat this or not? Is this part of my macro plan? Even to me, unless they're a suicidal patient, and that's a totally different expectation. Okay. There's a boundary here. You're not calling me. I'm not responding to you after a certain period of time. And if you do, it's going to wait. If you contact me at 7:00 on a Friday night, you won't hear from me until Monday morning. And the expectation is that I'm setting the boundary to let you know what is important to me as well. And I think sometimes when we don't set this boundary and we walk into this expectation of immediate responsiveness, then our fears start to kind of take over and we catastrophize in this space. Like, well, if I don't respond, what does that mean? It means all of my worst fears are going to play out in this situation, right? Like, the client's going to leave me. I'm going to get fired. I'm not as good of a coach as somebody else. And it's like, no, let's take a step back here and recognize what this is. And I want people to start to recognize that the fears that they're feeling in this space about not responding are most of the time very irrational and not grounded in reality. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And I think from the beginning, if we're talking about somebody who is a coach, because this was the specific question, I do think that this is where you set this up in the beginning. Hey, I respond if you at least this is how we do it. Your check-in is on Monday. Please send it in before noon Eastern Standard Time. Mm-hmm. You can send it any time before that, and I will respond within 24 hours after your update day. So if you don't hear from me by Wednesday, something probably happened, right? Like, I didn't get it. I'm probably dead. Like, I've never not answered in that window.
Do you die a lot?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
Like, if you send it in, if you're a Monday check-in and you send it on Saturday, mm-hmm. well, I'm going to get to it on Monday. Right. But like, people know that. And obviously there are certain expectations, like you said, like, okay, if you're a competition client peaking, you're a day out, obviously that's going to warrant a different response. And that's expected. Hey, send me this at this time. I know I'm going to respond mm-hmm. after this. I want to see you after this meal. Very particular. Somebody's making weight. Hey, let me know what your weight is at 10 a.m. because, weigh-ins are at 5. And then what do we need to do? Those are one-off situations, right? Or a small part of that client's plan. And setting that expectation is really important, because if you don't do that, then the client is going to go, oh, well, sometimes they answer within this amount of time. Sometimes it's this long. Sometimes I don't hear at all. That's completely inappropriate. Now, does that mean that because you send something as a client, like you talked about in the beginning, the expectations of people, this goes both ways, right? Like the information age and like everything being fast has gone both ways. And, people have to understand that when you are asking a question or you're doing, any kind of project or whatever it is, like you would rather somebody answer that thoroughly, because I know people who respond really quickly, but they're not very thorough and they don't remember anything. And they're just like shotgun answering. Like, do you want that? Is that really what you want out of a service or a coach? Probably not. You probably want somebody who's thoughtfully going to answer in that appropriate amount of time. But if it's better to answer at 5 p.m. or 2 p.m. or 8 p.m. or 8 a.m., that shouldn't matter if the expectation is, hey, within this 24-hour period, it's going to get back. So that's how I've had to look at it, because there is that expectation, especially in this world of like faster, better, cheaper. There's always another thing that somebody can be better at in that sense. But that's not what I'm chasing. You know what I mean? If you're going to chase quality, there's absolutely no reason for that to be the metric.
Yeah. Like, how many times has this happened to you? And this is one of my fun pet peeves, is somebody sends you a text message with a question and then immediately follows it up with a phone call to get an answer to that question because you didn't respond back within like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, oh, fuck you. Yeah. I'm hanging up the phone. Like, I'm not answering your question.
And this goes for, this is not like client. This is like friend. This is
this is like, family. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not like a client thing. That's
this
just like
mom.
I didn't see it, so I didn't answer.
Yeah. Like, so when you do that to me, you've just ensured you're not getting an answer via text.
I'm going to wait on purpose.
Or phone. Like, it's now, like, we're digging in.
But there's periods where, and this is something that I think people really struggle with. And I think a lot of people listening will be able to resonate. Like, there are times when I do things. And like, there's times when I'm texting. There's times when I'm emailing. There's times when I'm posting. There's times where I'm answering messages, right? Like, so you could be doing those things. So say like you post something on Instagram. So they're like, well, why didn't you answer the message? Because that wasn't when I was looking at it. You know what I mean? Sometimes I'm doing a lot of things, but like I'm already like walking chaos inside of my brain with like looking at a million different things. So I have to hone in like, nope, this is the time to do this.
Right.
This is the time. And I'm not always perfect with it, but the attention residue thing is very, very real, especially for me. Like, I really struggle with that. So if I bounce around between a bunch of different things, not like, oh, I'm researching this, but if I am like, oh, let me answer this and then post that and then do this and then really nothing gets done. So for me, it's like, if I posted something and was ignoring a text, wasn't because I was ignoring it, it's because I was going to get to those after, or vice versa, or whatever, But I think sometimes there is that guilt sometimes as a coach, like, okay, I'm going to post this now, but I haven't answered these updates yet. But it's like, well, this was the time to do this, and then this is going to be that time to do that.
Right.
And, there is still that guilt, even all these years I've been doing it sometimes, but it's like, this has to be done here. This is going to be done at this time.
Right.
And I think that it does come down to setting those boundaries for yourself and figuring out, okay, from the beginning, like, what is the expectation here? And if you are working for someone, okay, hey, what are the expectations? I talk about this guy all the time, Cal Newport. He's such a great writer. And he has a case against like email culture has basically made like businesses so wasteful with their time, like just pinging back and forth, whether it's like an email or like a message thread or whatever it might be for the company that you're working with. And it's just basically drawing everybody's attention. And it's like, to get what? To get that answer in what? That 30 minutes, like, that didn't really affect anything. So now we're just messaging all day without really getting any work done, because now when it comes down to like, oh, now I have time for the work bout, you're not very focused. You know what I mean? So obviously it's not to say to never use email. That's not the point. But the point is, there's this culture now of like, just like answer, all these different threads, all this different stuff. And it's like, yes, you're working a lot, but you're not productive.
Correct.
And that's the difference of like, do we want to be productive, or do we want to just say, I'm working? And I think that if you are on a traditional role where it's like, I clock into this time and I leave at that time, then you probably always feel like you're really behind. And then if you're somebody who has like a coaching business or anything that's, on your own, you always feel like you're doing a lot, but getting absolutely nothing done.
Right.
And those things still have to get done, but then you're just like left like, and that's what I always say. Like, there's certain times where you have to figure out where you, especially for this girl, if she is, she is an online coach, figuring out when things are best, and everybody operates better for certain things at different times. And if you have the availability to do that, like within your job, like, all right, I'm better at like creating presentations at this time. Okay, block off that time in your schedule. Or if you know, okay, I know that I have all these meetings on these days at these times, set that first and then figure out when are you going to do things around that. I just think that it's so easy to feel like everything has to happen all at once, but then literally nothing happens because we're so overwhelmed.
Because you're just overwhelmed. Yeah. So the first thing, again, was set your expectations with your clients and your employers in terms of when are you going to respond and what the expectation is for your responses. Step number 2 is, do you have solid and defined working hours? A lot of people don't, especially when people work at home. Set an expectation that my job is 8 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever it is. Okay, if it's a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, fine, I work 7 to 7. Set the expectation and know what that is. It's okay to have those boundaries in place. In fact, you need them in place if you want a better work-life balance. It's fundamentally important. And it's such an easy step that a lot of people miss because I think sometimes the assumption is that we all have like kind of a 9 to 5, 9 to 6 kind of thing. But when people are checking in with you on a Saturday or a Sunday, or you can blur those lines very easily with what you feel like your obligation is to your clients, to the service, to the company that you're providing, whatever. And so understand that it's okay to set a boundary to say, these are my set working hours. And here's the other thing, you guys that are listening to this, follow them. Okay?
Wait, whoa.
Setting a boundary that says I work 9 to 6 doesn't mean no one else can contact me after 6 and I can keep working. No. Put your laptop down, put your pen down, get up and walk away. Go do something, because at 6 o'clock, you're probably not burned out, but at 8 o'clock, you will be. And when you're so burned out that you don't want to go upstairs and read your kid a bedtime story, or you don't want to do other things, or you don't want to go for the walk after dinner because you're exhausted, okay, you're sacrificing something. So what are you gaining for all this extra work? Is it just money? And we're going to talk about money in just a second. But what are you sacrificing in that process? And so the idea becomes sometimes it's just as much for your clients as it is for you. Set working hours and stop working. Put it down. Walk away from it and find another time if you need to come back to it. Like perhaps if I'm ending every day at 6 o'clock, maybe I'm going to have to make the concession to say, all right, for 5 hours on Saturday, I'm going to work every other Saturday, or 3 hours Saturday, 3 hours Sunday, so that I can get caught up on some of this other stuff, whatever it is. Again, though, you're starting to bleed into other things that probably matter in your life that you're just neglecting. So
I have nothing to add since I don't do that.
Okay. Yeah. Silence.
I was like, I'm taking notes furiously.
She will grab this note sheet after. Trust me, you guys.
Yeah, I'm real bad about that. But that's a different podcast.
Okay. Now, step number 3 is one that I think will matter to some people. Next one I would tell you is to set yourself up to honestly look at your schedule and evaluate what you're responding to after hours. Ask yourself first and foremost, what happens if I don't respond to my employer or this client tonight? Is something catastrophic truly going to happen? Because what I find is, and here's the question I want you to start to focus on, is this your anxiety, or is it the anxiety of the client or employer that's demanding your immediacy? And that's a bit of for most of us, I think if we're taking an honest approach, the anxiety is not necessarily coming from the client or the employer. It's our anxiety that says, I want to respond to this person. This message came through. I'm going to respond. Because I would ask you to really focus on that, because a lot of us are doing this out of our own space and not necessarily something that the client or the employer is creating. Another thing to look at the other side of that coin would be, does their crisis become your emergency? And I'm always asking that because people are, especially with what I do, people are in pain, they're struggling with something. It's a highly emotional space for them. So there's this need for them to want to reach out. And so their crisis can very easily become my emergency. And so learning to set that boundary is an important thing. And asking myself sometimes, is this my client's anxiety or is this my anxiety? Do I feel like I need to be responsive to them, or can I pull back? And so some of the questions that I start going through in my mind is, am I enabling or am I helping? Right? And so some people will ask, what's the difference between enabling and what's the difference between helping? Well, the fundamental basic differences is in helping, am I teaching them to be self-sufficient? Am I giving them the skills that they can manage this problem on their own? Or am I enabling them because I'm now doing for them what they could be doing for themselves, but they aren't? Like, for example, one of the things that just comes to my mind is a client texting you, asking you about specific foods, or creating a food plan for me that tells me very specifically what I should eat and what I shouldn't eat, versus teaching the person, well, if we're looking at a macro-based diet, right, these are all the foods that you can choose from. I want you to find the foods that you like and work to help the person understand that when I'm not here, you can make the right healthy choices. And same thing for me. Like, I want to give you the skills to say, look, how do I manage this moment, this time, and this space, so that when a therapist isn't available or a friend or family member isn't there, how can I manage this and not fall apart? And so I'm always asking myself, am I enabling or am I helping? Am I teaching them to do this by themselves, or am I doing it for them? And I'm checking that against, is this my anxiety that's creating this, or is this the client's anxiety and expectation? And so you need to balance that, or I want you to start to balance that and roll through those questions in your head, and that will help you find a little bit more clarity in some of these moments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's basically becoming the easy button, right? Like, that's what you're doing. And there are certainly times and places, for the example that you use, like meal plans and certain meal sources or food sources and all that can be incredibly powerful and actually what the client needs, because not having that would be more detrimental. So I know you were just using that as an example, but I had to interject. But there's different time periods for everything.
Sure.
And then especially with our line of work, like when you're working with individuals, depending on where they're starting and what their goals are and like what they're struggling with is what you're going to tailor that to, of course. So it's never like hey, this is not good, or this is right, or this is wrong. It's just about where is somebody, but are you being the easy button, or are you saying, hey, let's develop these skills together, and, create a plan where you're slowly getting better over time. And that's because of your own self-efficacy. And that's really where we want change to happen, and then ultimately, once the client has that down, now we can actually work on the other fun stuff, all the other changes in their life and their lifestyle. And that's like what is and I do want to do a whole podcast on this, but people get so caught up in like this chaos of like all these ups and downs. And then when things are kind of stable, then they're like, well, this is boring. And I'm like, no, now we actually have the capacity to work on these other things, because now like your nutrition and your training is in a pretty stable spot and we're making some changes and adjustments, but it's not like every week is this like catastrophe. And so now the fact that we're in this kind of more boring space, now we're able to work on all these other behavioral modifications, and that's what's going to allow you to move forward in your life. And that's what is super exciting, is to get to a space, in my opinion, where people can have that, because for so long people are so consumed with food or training and being up and down, but they get like used to and almost addicted to that chaos of like these cycles. And then it's like, now we're not making any progress here, and everything else in the rest of your life, like you have no mental energy to dedicate towards those things either.
Right. Yeah. And so in that space, I would also challenge you to say, is this information that this person's asking for after hours something that I could have prevented? Like, what stopped me from getting them this information during the day that they so desperately need at 9:00 at night? Right. So am I using my time efficiently? And this kind of ventures into, point number 4 is your time being spent efficiently? With social media and the phones, it's so hard to focus without being pulled into these other rabbit holes. And so I know that people are like, well, you just talked about creating content, making posts, and doing all this other stuff. Like, when you're uploading the content, are you just uploading it, or are you checking other pages and looking at what other things are doing? I know the algorithms, to the best of my understanding of them, is the more you interact and engage overall, the more traction and feedback you get. So it rewards you for being engaging.
Well, it also,
I feel like you want to say something.
It rewards you for engaging, because then it like other people see that, and then it sees that you see that, and then it like links, then it shows other people your stuff. And it's this very like, it makes perfect logical sense, but it's also very like insidious in my opinion. There's like, I get it. I can't say that I don't understand it or like why they would do it, because it increases what their goal is. But it's very, very hard to modulate. And then it can also, anybody who's probably experienced this, like once you start to see certain things, then it shows you more of that. And then that can get really, really, really scary really quick, because now you're only being shown the same types of things. And if those are very negative or very polarizing things or whatever it is, now you're in this echo chamber of what might even be like a false reality. And you think that that's what everything is because that's all that you're seeing.
Yes.
And that is what I think people really get in trouble with on social media, is they think, oh, everybody's thinking this way, everybody's saying this. And when you remove yourself from that, you're like, wait, like literally 3 people said that. But those 3 people, you know, whatever, like that's a bad example, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's, it becomes this echo chamber of very small number of people. But that seems like that colors every other experience that you have on there. And then it shows you more and more and more of that. And that's where I think people get like in these really treacherous spots with social media, and feeling like, oh, everything is happening this way. And it's like, you know, if you go outside and you talk to like 50 people, you realize that like that's not true at all.
Right.
Like everybody is still going to have differing opinions. Everybody's still going to think differently. So yeah, that's another can be really detrimental aspect of this, is that's where I think people's like can mentally get really thrown off with social media, is because they only start to see certain messages.
Yeah.
And that's one of the many reasons, but that I think that is a large reason, especially now with the way that the algorithms are working, is they start to see one certain type of message, and then that can really affect people negatively.
Well, and I think that just brings up the complexity of this particular topic, is utilizing technology in and of itself, whether it's your phone, your computer, etc. And then you throw in some of the additional technology of social media. It makes this a complicated thing, because if your business thrives on activation and engagement within social media, and you also rely heavily on the technology to connect with your consumers, right? There's a lot of technology that you're utilizing there. And so it's very easy to be pulled and to lose focus and to be distracted within these sectors, so to speak. But it also doesn't eliminate the responsibility for you to set and follow boundaries. And that's the other part of it. This always is going to fall back on your shoulders. This isn't, I can blame Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg for all the evils of the world. Don't get me wrong. I think they specifically generate this shit to be addicting, and they do. And there's been documentaries and studies on it. But, you know, cocaine's addicting. And I'm not addicted to cocaine. So there's ways to set boundaries and to say, okay, I'm going to do some of these things. And maybe some of it is I need to figure out ways to not engage with it as much. Is there a way to reshift my business model where it doesn't have to be so heavily focused on this? There's things that we can ask ourselves responsibly in this space. But to just avoid yourself of responsibility by putting it on the people who created this thing, well, you're utilizing it. You're using that machine and that tool and that resource. So you're a part of this system too. So we don't just get to throw our hands up in the air and say we're victims here. The responsibility is on us to say, what's my time management? How am I staying focused? How am I setting these boundaries and adhering to them?
And this might be something where you have to involve the people in your life, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, hey, to your significant other, like, listen, like when I come home or when I get off of this, like I'm going to spend this amount of time maybe answering these things with other people. And then I need you to hold me accountable. Like at night, we're not going to be on our phones in bed. Or like simple rules like that, you know, can really, really help. Yeah. We're like, hey, when we go here, not to say don't bring your phone, but like, we're going to put this away.
Have a date night without your phones.
Yeah. Like keep it in your bag. Like there's, I mean, I always try to do this, like literally, I mean, if anybody's ever with me 9 times out of 10, unless I'm filming something or whatever, if I'm actually having a conversation, like after I've done that, like the phone is done. I will post that later. I will do whatever later. I am trying to be there, because it is like nice to obviously be face to face. And I think that there is, I don't know, I feel it like changing. I feel the shift coming, and I've talked to a lot of people in the industry for a while, and there has been this large resurgence of in-person training. And I don't even I'm not even talking about training, but that specifically, I think there is going to be a big push for people to be doing less online.
It's funny. Your industry is moving away from it and mine's moving toward it.
Well,
it's okay. It's
yeah,
not, it's just
no, I think
different
like
spaces, different professions.
I think that just in general, people are going to be more interested again in in-person things. Like there seemed to be a lack of interest, but
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, because no, not everybody. Obviously, some people are going to be, you know, living in their fucking metaverse goggles or whatever they're called, which is such a horrifying reality.
Different topic. Stay focused, Lauren.
I know. I swear I've been focused lately. I'm just a little tired right now. Speaking of work hours, it's like 9:00. Anyways, we're the worst.
I know.
But hey, we had to get we didn't say we were perfect.
We had to do it at this point. There was no other option.
We are actively working on this ourselves. So it makes us relatable, right, guys? But I do think there's going to be more of a shift to in-person things, or at least more of a blend, because I feel like it was so heavily pushed to be everything online that I think people are like literally dying for in-person things. Not to say, I'm not saying that online stuff is going away. It's never going away, but I do think that there's going to be more excitement from individuals to do things that are in-person and connected. And if it's not, I'm just going to keep telling myself that, and then I'm going to be hopeful for the future about it.
Well, I think when you shift, again, balance, when you shift something so far to one side,
the pendulum is
initially feels good, but then you start to miss, and there's deficiencies in the other things that were being provided on the other side of that space. And so people will kind of venture back to it and find a good balance with it. So point number 5, I think, to make would be, find a time to completely walk away from your phone and technology. This is okay to do. I gave a lecture recently to a group of doctoral students, and they were talking about substance abuse, addiction, things like that. And so one of the things that I made them all do is I said, all right, everybody, I want you to take out your cell phone. And they were all like super excited, and everybody was like holding it up. I'm like, great. I want you to find a person like two seats down and give them your phone. So people were like trying to shove it back in their pocket, and so I was like, okay,
sweating.
Just give it to somebody else, and now obviously it's a little different when you put the phone in your drawer at home versus like somebody else having your phone and seeing what messages might come up. But like no one was paying attention to the lecture anymore. They were all like, what are they doing? Like and I was asking people like, how does it feel to be away from your technology or to know that somebody else has it and what you don't have control over? And I think that was the part that I wanted to resonate with them, is the level of control that this has. That, like, if I hand you my laptop, it's not going to create the same anxiety that if I give you my phone.
No, it's so personal.
It is, and it's this need to feel connected through this device and what it represents. It's become this part of our identity and who we are, and like it's taken this really weird space to where like, doing something as simple as that for just a few minutes, you can literally create anxiety in people and watch it manifest. Like they can't sit still. They start to get jittery. They're not focusing. They're distracted. You're like, it's only 5 feet away from you.
Yeah.
And this lends itself to what you were talking about earlier when we talk about cell phone use, and that cell phones create this dopamine response, and that there's the text messages, the notifications, the sounds, the colors, the images.
Turn all that shit off, guys. If you still have that on, fucking get it off.
And that it all creates the same neurochemical response in the brain that drugs and alcohol create. It is an addiction to a large degree. And so devices have really started to replace our sense of self and identity. And people now judge their worth based off of the number of likes and activities and the pictures that they post, and how much we're being seen on social media. It's incredibly complicated when that's also a part of your business plan and how you generate revenue. So
that gets super blurry.
It does. And so that's why I'm saying this is not just let's create boundaries and this is simple and it's black and white, because it's not. There's no pun intended, 50 shades of gray here, and you've got to really master this. And this is something that it's not like, okay, this works for today. Sometimes we need to constantly check this and be like, okay, this used to work, and it doesn't work anymore. I need to change this boundary or put one in here. And it's this work in progress that's never done. It's a evolving space to be in. And I wanted to kind of bring that into the conversation because of how it adds to the complexity of this particular problem and why burnout is so prevalent.
Yeah. And then I think sometimes taking that time away from it, like, you don't have to do it as extreme as I have. But for me, I'm somebody who does need a little bit more time with things. And you really start to pick up on the patterns that really are not serving you, right? And what are you using this for, right? And like, when am I going to seek this? Is it because I want to feel distracted? That's a lot of the time, right? Like, okay, I got 5 minutes in between this and this, and this would be a really great time for me to recharge, right? To just kind of like to be mindful and present. But it's like, nope, it would just be easier to look at something and just, so am I looking to be distracted? Am I looking to be distracted from things that I don't want to sit with right now? Is that also it? Am I looking to replace this with something like, all right, I'm lonely right now. Like, let me look at this. And then you get stuck in this loop of like, all right, well, I feel like I'm watching this or hearing this and I'm a part of this. But then you feel like that during the moment, but afterwards it's not like when you're with somebody in person and you have that like energy exchange and you're like, oh, okay, this was a great conversation or this was fun or whatever. And then you leave feeling like fulfilled. Well, hopefully if you're hanging out with the right people. But when you do that in an online capacity, you might be like, oh, that was really entertaining or that was really educational or that was funny. And it might stay with you. Like if it was like a really dramatic movie or something. But if you're scrolling social for like that like connection piece, I find that you feel it in that moment potentially, but then it's completely devoid afterwards, and almost even worse for whatever reason. And I don't know the mechanism as to why, but it seems to be almost this like bigger letdown than it was before you even looked at it.
Right.
So I think that sometimes taking those periods away allows you to recognize when you wouldn't be able to recognize otherwise, okay, why am I feeling or why am I gravitating towards this? Or what am I looking to use this for? And those are really hard questions to ask yourself, and you probably won't like the answer.
Right.
Like what I just shared, like that's not like a fun thing to share. Like, hey, here's what I'm seeking this out for. But that is the reality for me. And I'm sure a lot of other people as well.
Yeah. I think it is. And so to me, what's being lost in this process of overuse of technology and why it leads to burnout is we're being sucked into these spaces, and what's being lost is the meaningful, deep related connections between individuals. We've lost meaningful relationships with individuals and we've replaced it with technology, and it leaves you feeling void. And so some of the things that you start to ask people, like, is this making you happier? And is this making you, and for this particular question, since it's business related, is it making you a better businesswoman to respond? Right? Like, more to your point, I would ask you, is replying at 8 o'clock or posting at 8 o'clock p.m. on Sunday night really about business? Like, do we need to be on Instagram at that point in time, looking at videos, posting stuff, like whatever it is?
It might
tagging?
be, but
I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
I'm not judging whether you say that it is.
But
because I can guarantee you can always find reasons to do something.
No, fuck your Sunday post.
And you can actually find reasons to not do something.
What if I like?
How are you justifying it as a big part of it? Fine, Laurin, post at 8 o'clock at night. But don't bitch about being tired or exhausted or I can't stop staring at my screen. This is bullshit, Rick. Okay, so
terrible example.
As you also talked about earlier, is there anything that you're doing on social media that's really, truly enhancing your life? Like, watch your habits when it comes to social media. How many times, once you put the phone down, how many times do you feel compelled to pick it back up? How do you feel putting your phone down, right? How do you feel walking away from your computer? This starts to breed more of like the anxiety that exists within you, or is it really the demand and the response coming from the client or the employer? And sometimes the client and employer can create that, and then you carry the anxiety with you. But I think sometimes what's also happening is when it comes to work is mindfulness is being lost in this space as well. And we're not allowing for things to create more mindfulness throughout our day, which is being present and engaged in the moment. And so our ability to not be bored or stay engaged is like we justify that action now because we say this is a work cause related thing, right? Versus like if you were talking to a child and a child was picking up their phone as much as you pick up your phone, you would say that this kid's like, they're bored and they're searching for gratification, right? They're looking for some sort of stimulus to be entertained. But now as adults, we've conveniently replaced that same compulsion to grab the phone with the rationalization that this is work related. So we've made it okay for us to do it, but we can judge and condemn it when it's our kids. But it's totally okay for us to do this. And it's not. It is the same thing. You've just used a rationalization that makes it okay for you to do it. But you're saying no to my son or my daughter who's constantly reaching for their phone. It's the same thing. I don't care whether it's a tag from TikTok or Instagram versus clients texting you at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. You're still responding. You're still engaging in your phone. It's the same thing.
And I would say being very mindful of what you're consuming as well. And that goes to anything that you're visually seeing or that you are listening to. And this goes back to a little bit of the algorithm type stuff, right? Like what you seek out is what you're going to see more of. But if you do that in a positive way, right? Like you can use this in a way that it is, okay, I am learning, being entertained, being motivated, whatever it is that you're seeking out, making sure that you're putting those types of things in. Okay, am I listening to like YouTube videos and podcasts that are going to, move me forward in some way? Or they're just funny and I like them. Like those things are all okay. You just have to say, okay, is this helping me? Or man, every time I see this, it's, brings me down. Okay, what is that for? Why is that? Like, what is the deeper reason behind that? And maybe it's probably a you thing, right? It's not the person who's putting it out. It's not their fault that you feel a certain way about what they're putting out. Like that's definitely a reflection of you and yourself, but maybe you don't need to see that right now. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that like they shouldn't put it out, but which is always this hilarious thing. Like nobody should be sharing this kind of stuff. It's like, who are you who the fuck are you to say what somebody should share or not share? They're sharing it. You don't have to look at it, right? Like, I mean, ultimately,
swipe up,
like,
go,
okay,
move on.
And because some people might actually like that. Some people might hate it. So I'm a little bit less like, okay, who post what you want to post. And if you don't want to see that, then just don't engage with it.
Yeah.
And then you'll see less of it over time because then that's how that works.
The last step that I think I want to get into, and there's one or two other thoughts that I want to share on this before we kind of wrap up. But the last like practical step I think I can really give you is explain to your clients or your employer some of the other aspects of your life and let them know the importance of those values to you. Something like, hey, I wanted to let you know that, and if you message me after 6 p.m., I generally don't respond until the next day. After 6 is the time that I dedicate to being with my family. I'm making an effort to be away from my phone or my computer. And I try not to pick those things up because by the time the kids are to bed, I'm going to sleep and my sleep is important to me. A lot of times, 9 out of 10 times, the clients will respect that boundary. It's not self-disclosure in like a dangerous or an unhealthy way. You're simply letting them know the boundary and why it's important to you. And I think sometimes when people know why, they can buy into it and they're going to be supportive of that. I mean, most of your clients love you as a coach. And they care about you and they think wonderful things about you and they want to be part of that aspect of who you are. And so they might still send messages, but if the expectation now is that, okay, cool, she's with her family. There's
nothing wrong with sending something.
The expectation is she's just not going to get to me till the next day. Fine. I'm okay with that. And maybe it even forces them into checking some of those things and saying like, do I need to text her right now? Because some people are like, if I don't do it now, I'll never remember. Fine. I get that part of it.
That's why I don't, and everybody has this is not a coaching practices podcast, but honestly, the texting and the like DMs and all that kind of stuff, it gets so messy. That's why I'm like, if it's business related, if it's coaching related, send me an email. Yeah. Like, because, obviously on Instagram, if it's something like, oh, this, exciting thing happened or like this tag or like whatever. But if it's like a question, if it's something related, because there are so many times where I will either miss something, so many times where I'll open something and then I got pulled to something else. And with an email, simply, mark on read. Good to go. Everything, when I open my email, I am working. I know that, right? And everything is going there for that particular reason. And everybody has different methods that they use, and I'm not going to knock that. But for me, especially if you're somebody who struggles in this area, it might be better to have email policy for business related things or whatever platform that you choose to use. Or maybe you have a business cell phone. And then you only answer that if you have the capacity to do that. I know people who have that. They have 2 phones. They have a coaching phone and then they have a regular phone. So it's like, maybe that works for you if you can do that. So everybody is going to be different here. But if you're somebody who struggles in this area, it might be better to condense it to one thing. I would say that is absolutely a game changer for focus, at least. Yeah. And turning off your notifications, you guys. Oh my gosh. Like, seriously. Like that, when I see people's stuff like just come up, I have just a few notifications on my phone for that particular reason, because otherwise, like, I will literally just be drawn to it and then I will be completely distracted. And
until you answer it and then you're distracted.
Or just even if I don't answer it, even if I don't care about answering it, it could be like, Uber, save $2. And I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't care. And now I can't get back on track, which obviously, again, is a me thing. Right. But I have to set up my environment to be successful.
Right. And so just a few other little things here. Number one, you can also find various apps that you can download that will help kind of restrict access to certain things, social media filters. You can put and establish time limits on certain things so that like you can set, 30 minutes on Instagram a day. That could be the time that you spend posting or the time that you engage with people, whatever. You can break that up into 10-minute increments, however you want to do it. There's filters, there's lockouts, all those different kinds of useful tools that you can download. I also would recommend people start engaging in mindfulness activities, things that are specifically designed to draw your attention into the moment, to exist, to learn how to find peace without these things. Yoga, meditation, jujitsu, float tanks, things like that come to the surface. Again, go to the gym, start participating in sports, do something that's creative, artistic, turn off your notifications, delete apps that you don't need, maybe even change where you charge your phone, right? Like if you're going to bed at night, charge your phone downstairs. Everybody uses their cell phone now as an alarm clock, which is also part of the problem. Because people will, they use their phone and then immediately they're engaging in stuff. And so
it's so bad.
It is. It's a toxic
But then
space.
there's this like awful now, it's like we all operated without phones for so long. And then now it's like this weird crutch of like, well, what if something happens? First of all, if you call me in the middle of the night, I'm not answering because my phone's turned over. Just saying. But it's more of like an emergency thing. Like if I were to need it, if something bad happened, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which is so irrational. Like, okay, I couldn't walk 2 steps to the bathroom, but, that's what keeps it from like moving the charging port. Right. But that is so true. Like anytime that I've woken up and I've like, it's such a bad habit. Wake up, roll over. Okay. Mm-hmm. Check. Let me look at my email. Let's delete some stuff. Let's see. Oh shit, this happened. Oh fuck. Look at it. Immediately. It's just like, stress.
Right.
So if you can eliminate that, if you're in a place where you feel, safe enough that you can do that, or, you don't need to have it next to you, I would certainly encourage that as well.
Yeah. And so one of the last points that I really wanted to make with this podcast, and this is going to take it in kind of a slightly different direction than where we've been going. These have all been more practical steps. But I've actually found in working with clients that sometimes practical steps are very useful. But if I can associate a change that I'm making with a bigger cause in my life, then it resonates on a deeper level with me. And so one of the things that I really want to discuss is your perception of events and things becomes your reality, right? So how you look at something determines how you feel about something. Like, for example, I can ask you a sword, right? Is a sword a weapon or is it a tool to be used for protection? Now, the object of a sword doesn't change, right? But you view it either positively or negatively depending on your perception of it. This hasn't changed. The sword doesn't, but what you think does. And so one of the, I guess, kind of concepts that I want people to really understand is, and this has started to really resonate with several of my clients. If I use the word retirement, is that a positive word or a negative word? Okay, because a lot of this is focused on work, right? Setting up boundaries for social media and technology around work. So let me ask you this. If I were to take away work, if work is no longer a part of your life, what exists in its place? What else is there? Okay, and why am I getting
a lot of things?
Right. Well, for some people it might be. For other people it might be if you take away work, I don't know what else is there. I don't know how to fill my day. And if I don't know how to fill my day, then I start to see how important work means to you, like the significance that this is playing. But here's the other side of it. By asking you, if I take away work, what else is in your life? And you start rattling off all these different things. Great. What we've just done is identify a deeper, more meaningful reason for these boundaries. And so by asking people to look at it on this deeper level, it's not just like, well, I want to spend 3 more hours a week or do this, right? There's nothing worse to me than when my 6-year-old says, like, Dad, will you play a game with me? And I say, yeah, sure. And he's like, Dad, can you get off your phone? And I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm an asshole. Right? Like, and then I have to like sprint upstairs, throw my phone in a drawer and like overcompensate because I'm like, I
throw it out the window.
I don't want my son to think that my phone is more important. And when the 6-year-old is calling me out on it, I'm like, okay, it's time. Like, being a father is more important to me than being the best therapist in the world, right? It's more important than whatever it is I'm looking at TikTok or Instagram or social media or whatever else is there. That is
even
more
if it's
important.
work related.
And so when I challenge myself with that question and I say, if I take work away, what else is there? Now, obviously parents with kids have a bit of a cop-out answer right here, right? But if you go beyond that, like what else exists in your life? What do you do? What other things exist? And so the idea of this is to identify a deeper meaning for the change that you're looking to implement. These boundaries have significant consequences and implications with them. So what are they? Remind yourself that this is more than just an annoyance or reducing some level of anxiety or frustration or, whatever. Because the reality becomes, if you can think about boundaries in this way, that a boundary in no way, shape, or form means that you stop loving or working or living happily. They actually mean the opposite. You gain freedom within these limits. And that without these boundaries, your life and moments experiences happen in between small breaks of work. And so the point here is that your work has really become your priority and your reality. And so it's good to sacrifice and deny yourself these boundaries, so to speak, for the sake of other people and for the sake of your family. That you need boundaries in order to really understand and make these choices. And so if you're able to kind of conceptualize it on that deeper level, finding more meaning in these boundaries, then I think it can resonate and it will take a deeper charge with you. And this kind of falls in line with that one podcast we did about finding meaning in life. Because some people have called and inquired, and some of my other clients have listened to that, and they're like, I've really struggled with this question. And that was just one of the things that resonated with them. I said, okay, let's take away work from your life. It's gone. You're retired today. What's in your life? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, that's where we need to start, right? Because now work is all of your life. That's the only thing that exists. So there is no balance. You're 100% over here. For other people, they're like, well, I have work, but if I take that away, I have these things. Well, great. There's more meaning in your life right now. So let's start to set these boundaries so that these other things have an equal productive role in your life. And so you see a little bit more of a balance there, and it helps people conceptualize it and buy into it so that the change means something more than just 4 or 5 more hours of freedom.
And I think to wrap this up, when you're more deliberate with time, at least this is what I notice with myself, when I'm more deliberate with things, hey, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to compartmentalize a little bit better. You're way more efficient. And then that, like you said, allows you to actually have more flexibility. So you are more rigid on the front end. It's kind of like what Jocko says, like discipline equals freedom. People are like, how does discipline equal freedom? Well, if you're more disciplined with your time and how you manage things and how you approach situations, then you actually have more freedom to do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And this is played out over so many different types of people, and they share different methods and methodologies and all of that. There's different ways to approach it, but being a little bit more organized and diligent with what you're doing and saying, okay, I'm going to give myself 2 hours to 100% focus on this, you will get so much more done than in 4 hours of distracted work.
Correct.
And then when you still got it done, right? But now you're left feeling very drained instead of like, oh, it's at the 2 hour limit. I did it. And now I can move forward. And I have this extra hour now in my day to do whatever I choose. Mm-hmm. So it really is. And it's so hard when you're in it. And I try to work with clients on this in different scenarios, but just when they're very overwhelmed, it's like, take 10 minutes. I mean, obviously more if you have it, right? Ideally a little bit more, but at least 10 minutes to just sit down and like just dump out whatever is happening, mm-hmm. right? Like, what are you thinking about? And just let whatever comes to mind come to mind, and give yourself that space to actually be introspective about what you're struggling with. And I think you'll be really surprised to see that it actually does come up pretty quickly. Doesn't mean you're going to know exactly what to do, but now you're able to have a better starting point and a better direction.
Exactly.
And then it's like, all right, now I gave myself this space to think about this. Okay, if I did this once a week for 15 minutes, now I'll be able to build on that. And then maybe you have a little bit more time, so now you can do
mm-hmm.
it every day. And then, right, those are the practices that it's like, oh, that's how people are able to like meditate and journal every morning. And that gives them time back to the rest of their day.
Correct.
So that was a little bit of a tangent. All good. Okay.
That's all I had to.
Focus. So thank you guys so much for listening. As always, if you enjoyed the show, we would really appreciate you sharing it. That is the best way to get out the message and support us. I'm going to put Rick's contact information in the show notes. As always, if you would like to contact him for counseling. I'm also going to put in the landing page to get signed up for the app. We are getting much closer. I don't have an exact date, you guys, but it is coming soon. Super excited. So if you want to be the first to hear about that, I will put that information below. And for any information about coaching or any of the other services that we offer, you can visit teamlocofit.com.